Every second, somewhere in the galaxy, an Ork weapon fires that shouldn't exist. Built by creatures who can barely spell their own names, yet somehow bend reality to their will through sheer bloody-minded conviction. Today's tale takes us into the grease-stained heart of the ultimate impossibility, watching a barely literate greenskin create a weapon that will make tech priests weep tears of oil and force the Imperium to rewrite the laws of physics.
In the sprawling scrapyard that served as Mekboy Skarjaw's workshop, the first pale light of dawn revealed a landscape that would have driven any Imperial tech priest to madness. Twisted spires of salvaged metal reached toward the sky like the fingers of a dying god, while half-assembled war machines squatted between mountains of rusted plating and coils of wire that sparked with inexplicable energy. The air thrummed with the low, resonant hum of machinery that, by all laws of physics, should have collapsed into scrap decades ago, yet somehow continued to function with the stubborn persistence that defined all Ork technology. How do you create miracles from garbage? How do you make the impossible not just possible, but inevitable? The answer lies in understanding that for Orks, belief becomes physics, enthusiasm trumps mathematics, and the word impossible is just another engineering challenge waiting to be solved with bigger hammer. Skarjaw stretched his massive arms as he emerged from the corrugated metal hut he called home, his cybernetic left eye whirring as it focused on the organized chaos before him. To human eyes, his workshop would appear to be nothing more than a junkyard where explosions happen to occur with alarming frequency. But Skarjaw saw something else entirely. He saw potential. Every twisted piece of metal, every sparking wire, every leaking fuel drum represented a component in the grand symphony of destruction he conducted daily. "Right den, you lazy gits!" he bellowed, his voice carrying across the scrapyard like the roar of a chainsaw through ceramite. "Time to get back to the real work." A dozen Gretchens scattered from their hiding places among the debris, chittering excitedly as they scrambled to their assigned tasks. These diminutive greenskins served as Skarjaw's hands and eyes, crawling through spaces too small for his massive frame and fetching components with the dedication of religious zealots, which, in a way, they were. If you're hungry for more tales where the impossible becomes inevitable and scrap metal transforms into instruments of cosmic destruction, smash that subscribe button. The Emperor protects those who support the channel, but Gork and Mork favor those who appreciate proper Orky ingenuity. The morning routine began as it always did, with Skarjaw making his rounds through the workshop's various sections. In one corner, a massive hydraulic press continued its endless work, stamping out crude but effective armor plating from sheets of salvaged Imperial steel. The press operated without any visible power source, its pistons driven by what Imperial scholars would later classify as localized reality distortion, but what any Ork would simply call da machine spirit, what likes to work real hard. Nearby, a forge belched green flames that burned without fuel, maintained by nothing more than Skarjaw's absolute certainty that green fire was obviously better than any other color. The temperatures it generated exceeded anything an Imperial foundry could produce, yet the crude chimney above it was constructed from nothing more than welded scrap metal and optimism. 3 Gretchen tended the flames, feeding them with offerings of twisted metal and the occasional unfortunate squig that wandered too close. But it was the centerpiece of the workshop that truly defied comprehension. Rising from the heart of the scrapyard like a metallic tree, Skarjaw's great gear gubbin stretched 30 meters into the sky, its countless wheels, pistons, and mechanical arms working in perfect harmony, despite the fact that no two components shared the same origin. Imperial tank treads meshed with Eldar anti-grav plates, while Tau pulse rifle capacitors somehow channeled power through cables salvaged from a Chaos Reaver Titan. The entire structure hummed with contentment, each part knowing its place in the greater mechanical ecosystem through the inexplicable logic of Ork engineering. "That's it, you beautiful piece of scrap," Skarjaw murmured affectionately, running a grease-stained hand along one of the main support struts. "Keep dose wheels turning and dose sparks flying. We got important work to do today, we have." The fundamental truth about Ork technology wasn't written in any Imperial manual or Xenos codex. It lived in the collective unconscious of the greenskin race, pulsing through their crude neural networks like an ancient song remembered in the blood. As Skarjaw began his daily inspection of the workshop's impossible machinery, that truth manifested in 1,000 small miracles that would have reduced the most learned tech adept to gibbering hysteria. A fuel line constructed entirely from repurposed Imperial prayer beads somehow channeled promethium without a single leak, the sacred words etched into each bead now serving the decidedly unsacred purpose of combustion logistics. A targeting cogitator salvaged from a destroyed Le Mans rust tank computed firing solutions with flawless accuracy despite having its memory core replaced with a collection of colorful bottle caps that Skarjaw had deemed more computery looking. Most impossibly of all, a gravity lift operated at perfect efficiency while powered by nothing more than a hamster wheel operated by an enthusiastic squig who seemed to genuinely enjoy his work. "See, that's the beauty of it all," Skarjaw explained to a particularly attentive Gretchen who had paused in his cable sorting duties to watch the squig-powered lift in action. "You Yumis and your fancy book learning, always going on about how things are supposed to work. But we Orks, we know the real secret. If you think it works hard enough, it bloody well will work." The Gretchen nodded sagely, though whether from genuine understanding or simply because agreeing with mech boys was generally safer than the alternative remained unclear. What was clear, however, was the tangible effect of this philosophy made manifest. The workshop practically thrummed with potential energy, every jury-rigged connection and improvised component drawing power from the collective certainty of its Ork creators that things would work exactly as intended. This wasn't mere superstition or primitive thinking. It was a fundamental force of nature as real and measurable as gravity or electromagnetism. Imperial xenobiologists had a term for it: the Wa field, a psychic phenomenon generated by Ork minds that could bend reality to match Ork expectations. But even they failed to truly comprehend its scope and implications. When 1,000,000 Orks believed that red vehicles moved faster, the universe itself adjusted to accommodate that belief. When a mech boy was absolutely convinced that his latest contraption would punch through a bunker wall, physics politely stepped aside to avoid an argument. Skarjaw paused before a workbench where dozens of weapon components lay scattered in what appeared to be random chaos. Bolt shells nested alongside plasma coils, while chainsawed teeth had been carefully arranged next to delicate Eldar energy crystals. To an outside observer, it looked like the aftermath of an explosion in an armory. To Skarjaw, it was a palette of possibilities, each component singing with potential combinations and applications that existed just beyond the edge of conventional understanding. He picked up a standard Imperial laser gun power pack, turning it over in his massive hands with surprising delicacy. The device had been designed by tech priests to provide exactly 43 standard shots before requiring replacement. Its sacred construction followed patterns laid down during the Dark Age of technology, each circuit blessed and each component sanctified according to ancient ritual. In human hands, it would perform exactly as specified, no more and no less. In Ork hands, however, it became something else entirely. Skarjaw's absolute conviction that he could soup it up proper began to warp its fundamental properties even as he examined it. The power cells inside started to resonate at new frequencies, their energy output climbing beyond factory specifications as they responded to his unshakable belief in improvement. By the time he set it back down, the device was capable of approximately 112 shots, though any human attempting to use it would likely find their hands blown off by the supercharged discharge. "That's why we're the best at this," he muttered, making notes on a piece of parchment using a stylus made from a sharpened bolt shell. "We don't let silly things like engineering principles get in the way of proper results." The morning's inspection revealed the workshop to be in typical working order, which was to say that 17 different projects were simultaneously on fire, under construction and exceeding their theoretical performance parameters. A squadron of half-assembled war tracks sat ready for their engines, devices that would burn anything from promethium to fermented squig droppings with equal efficiency. A collection of shooter barrels awaited attachment to firing mechanisms that would transform simple projectiles into instruments of devastating accuracy through the simple expedient of wanting very badly to hit their targets. The ground shook with the thunderous approach of massive feet, each step sending tremors through the scrapyard that set 1,000 loose components rattling in sympathetic harmony. Skarjaw's cybernetic eye whirred as it automatically adjusted its focus, tracking the source of the disturbance with the instinctive wariness of any mech who had survived more than a few encounters with displeased war bosses. What he saw emerging through the morning haze was enough to make even his battle-hardened nerves tense with anticipation. Warboss Grimskull was a walking monument to Orky excess, standing nearly 4 meters tall in his custom mega armor and bristling with enough weaponry to level a small Imperial settlement. His massive frame was a patchwork of scarred green flesh, bionics, and armor plating that had been painted in a garish combination of red and yellow. Colors chosen not for any tactical consideration, but simply because Grimskull liked the way they looked when covered in enemy blood. Twin power claws gleamed at the ends of his arms, their energy fields crackling with barely contained violence, while a custom shooter the size of an Imperial heavy bolter jutted from his shoulder mount like a mechanical horn of war. "Skarjaw!" the war boss bellowed, his voice carrying across the scrapyard with the subtle delicacy of an artillery barrage. "Get your scrawny green hide over here. I got a job for you, and it better be the biggest, shootiest, most explodey job you've ever done." The Mekboy approached with the careful balance of respect and self-preservation that defined all interactions with Ork leadership. Too much deference would mark him as weak, inviting a casual beating for the good of morale. Too little would result in being used to test the effectiveness of power claw modifications. The key was to project confidence while maintaining just enough wariness to show proper recognition of the war boss's superior position in the clan hierarchy. "What's the word, boss?" Skarjaw asked, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better decades. "Got another job that needs the proper Mekboy touch?" Grimskull's scarred face split into a grin that revealed a collection of metal teeth, each one a trophy from a different campaign. His eyes, one natural, one a glowing red augmetic that constantly tracked potential threats, fixed on Skarjaw with the intensity of a targeting laser. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority mixed with barely contained excitement. "Listen up, you git, 'cause I'm only gonna say this once," the warboss growled, leaning down until his breath, which smelled of promethium, gunpowder, and something that might have been roasted Gretchen, washed over the Mekboy. "I been hearing stories from the other clans. Stories about fancy new weapons that can blow up entire Imperial fortresses with one shot. Stories about guns that shoot things what ain't even bullets, but still kill you just as dead." The implications hit Skarjaw like a runaway truck. In the competitive hierarchy of Ork society, technological superiority wasn't just a matter of pride. It was a matter of survival. A warboss whose mechboys couldn't produce weapons to match the neighboring clans would quickly find himself replaced by someone whose mechboys could. And replaced, in Ork terms, typically involved significantly more violence than a simple change in management structure. "I want you to build me something that'll make all those other gits shut up and take notice," Grimskull continued, his power claws unconsciously flexing as he spoke. "Something so big and nasty and impossible that when they see it, they'll know who's really the boss around here. Something that'll make the whole sector remember why you don't mess with Grimskull's boys." The challenge sent a thrill of anticipation through Skarjaw's nervous system. This wasn't just another routine commission for upgraded shooters or souped-up vehicle engines. This was a chance to push the boundaries of Ork engineering into entirely new territories, to create something that would stand as a testament to the fundamental superiority of greenskin ingenuity over the rigid thinking of lesser species. "Now that sounds like a proper job," Skarjaw replied, his mind already racing through possibilities. "But this ain't gonna be no quick fix, boss. If you want something really special, something that'll make the whole galaxy sit up and take notice, then I'm gonna need time, materials, and enough Gretchen to keep the work flowing proper." Grimskull's grin widened, revealing even more metal teeth. "Time you got, long as you don't take too long. Materials you can scavenge from wherever you want. I'll make sure the boys know to bring you back the good stuff from our raids. And as for Gretchen," he gestured casually toward a group of the diminutive creatures who had been eavesdropping from behind a pile of scrap metal. "Take as many as you need. Just remember, this weapon better be worth all the trouble, or I'll be testing it on you first." The raid began before dawn, as most successful Ork operations did, not because of any sophisticated tactical planning, but because Grimskull had gotten bored waiting around and decided that now was as good a time as any to acquire the materials his mechboy would need. The target was an Imperial supply convoy traveling through the Kalos Pass, a route that Imperial commanders had foolishly assumed was too remote and well-defended to attract greenskin attention. Skarjaw rode in the passenger compartment of Grimskull's personal battle wagon, a mobile fortress that defied every principle of vehicle design, while somehow achieving speeds that would have impressed the pilots of Imperial racing craft. The machine's engine, a hybrid creation combining parts from 3 different Imperial vehicle types and what appeared to be a decorative fountain, roared with enthusiasm as it propelled 30 tons of armored fury across the wasteland, at velocities that should have torn the vehicle apart from centrifugal forces alone. "Keep your eyes peeled, Mekboy," Grimskull shouted over the din of the engine and the rattling of ammunition belts. "This convoy's supposed to be carrying all sorts of fancy Imperial kit. Weapons, armor, maybe even some of those shiny bits the tech priests like so much." The battle wagon crested a ridge, revealing the Imperial convoy spread out below like a mechanical serpent threading through the rocky terrain. 6 Chimera transports flanked a trio of Leman Russ battle tanks, while sentinel walkers prowled the flanks like mechanical guard dogs. To most observers, it would have appeared to be a formidable defensive formation, bristling with enough firepower to reduce a small city to rubble. To the Orks, it looked like a shopping expedition. "Wag!" The cry erupted from dozens of throats as the raiding party launched itself down the slope with all the subtlety of an avalanche. War bikers screamed ahead on machines that belched flame and smoke, their riders firing wildly into the Imperial formation while performing stunts that would have killed any sane pilot. Behind them came the heavier vehicles, more battle wagons, trucks loaded with boys eager for combat, and a single deaf dread that stomped through the chaos like a mechanical avatar of destruction. The Imperial response was textbook perfect. Vox channels crackled with precise tactical updates as tank commanders coordinated their fire patterns, and infantry squads moved to establish overlapping fields of fire. Las weapons discharged in disciplined volleys, while heavy bolters carved precise arcs of death through the approaching greenskin horde. It might have worked against any rational enemy. Unfortunately for the Imperials, they were facing Orks. The first Leman Russ to open fire scored a direct hit on the lead warbike, vaporizing both machine and rider in a cloud of superheated plasma. The second bike, rather than being deterred by this demonstration of Imperial firepower, actually accelerated toward the tank while its rider whooped with delight. The explosive collision that followed sent debris raining across the battlefield and left a smoking crater where the tank had been. "That's what I'm talking about," Grimskull roared, firing his personal shooter at a chimera that had made the mistake of presenting its side armor to his position. The rounds punched through the vehicle's plating with ease, despite the fact that his ammunition consisted primarily of scrap metal, bent nails, and what appeared to be several Imperial coins. Proper Orky spirit, that is. Skarjaw found himself oddly mesmerized by the tactical display unfolding before him. This wasn't just combat. It was a live demonstration of Ork technology under battlefield conditions. Every weapon performed beyond its theoretical specifications. Every vehicle moved faster than its design should have allowed. Every piece of equipment exceeded its expected parameters through the simple expedient of being operated by beings who absolutely refused to accept limitations. A war track, its engine clearly cobbled together from at least 4 different vehicle types, somehow managed to outmaneuver an Imperial sentinel despite weighing 3 times as much. The walker's pilot, trained in the finest Imperial tactics and equipped with superior sensor arrays, found himself consistently outpositioned by an Ork driver whose navigational system consisted of looking where he wanted to go and pressing the accelerator until he got there. The battle's conclusion was as inevitable as it was spectacular. Within 20 minutes, the Imperial convoy was either destroyed or captured, its defenders either dead or fleeing across the wasteland with Ork war cries echoing behind them. But for Skarjaw, the real treasure wasn't in the military victory. It was in the salvage. "Right, you lot," he bellowed to a gang of Gretchen who had emerged from the battle wagon with salvage equipment. "Start sorting through all this lovely Imperial kit. I want every power cell, every targeting system, every piece of fancy tech that looks like it might be useful." The haul was beyond his wildest expectations. Crates of last weapon power packs, each one a masterpiece of Imperial engineering that could be souped up beyond recognition. Targeting cogitators from the destroyed tanks, their machine spirits waiting to be convinced that accuracy was merely a matter of wanting to hit things badly enough. Best of all, the wreckage of a chimera had yielded its entire communications array, a collection of Vox equipment that would form the perfect foundation for the kind of impossible weapon that would make the entire sector take notice. The fever dream struck Skarjaw 3 days after the convoy raid, as he lay sprawled across a makeshift cot constructed from chimera seats and Gretchen ingenuity. It began as most revelations did among the Orkoid species, with a sudden, overwhelming certainty that defied logic, explanation, or the basic laws of physics. One moment he was sleeping peacefully, dreaming of properly functioning hydraulic systems and well-organized spare parts inventories. The next, his mind was flooded with visions of destruction so magnificent that they made his cybernetic eye spark with sympathetic overload. In the vision, he saw a weapon that transcended mere engineering. It was a manifestation of pure Orky-will-given metal form and explosive purpose. The device towered above the battlefield like a mechanical god, its barrel stretching toward the heavens, while its base rooted deep into the earth through a network of power conduits that pulsed with green energy. But it wasn't the weapon's size that made Skarjaw's heart race with excitement. It was its fundamental impossibility. The barrel was constructed from materials that shouldn't have been able to coexist. Imperial ceramite wrapped in Eldar wraithbone, bound together with chaos-touched metal and sealed with what appeared to be crystallized Wa energy. The firing mechanism operated on principles that would have sent tech priests into catatonic shock. It didn't simply propel projectiles through chemical or electromagnetic force, but rather convinced reality itself that the target needed to stop existing in its current location. "The Gork-Touched Megablasta," Skarjaw whispered, the name arriving in his mind with the certainty of divine revelation. In the vision, the weapon's first test firing had punched a hole through 3 separate star systems before finally dissipating somewhere in the galactic core. Imperial fleets had diverted their courses to avoid even the lingering energy signature, while Chaos champions had offered tribute just to ensure the weapon was never aimed in their direction. The technical challenges alone should have been insurmountable. The power requirements exceeded anything achievable through conventional means. Even stripping every generator from an Imperial hive city wouldn't provide sufficient energy to charge the weapon's primary capacitors. The targeting system would need to account for galactic rotation, gravitational lensing, and the inherent unpredictability of warp space. Most impossibly of all, the weapon would need to be constructed using materials and techniques that existed only in the fevered imagination of Ork engineering. But as Skarjaw's vision continued, he saw the solutions unfolding with crystal clarity. The power source would be a fusion of captured Imperial plasma reactors, Eldar solar collection arrays, and a massive hamster wheel operated by the largest, most enthusiastic squig ever bred for the purpose. The targeting system would bypass conventional computation entirely, instead relying on a sophisticated network of Gretchen observers equipped with telescopes and an unshakable belief in their ability to point at distant objects with supernatural accuracy. The construction process itself would be a masterpiece of organized chaos. Teams of Gretchen would work around the clock, their natural aptitude for following incomprehensible orders, perfectly suited to assembling components that defied conventional understanding. The weapon's barrel would be forged in sections, each piece blessed by the local mix and tested for proper explosiveness before being fitted into place with the kind of precision that only came from absolute certainty that everything would work exactly as intended. "Boss! Boss!" The urgent chittering of a Gretchen pierced through the vision, dragging Skarjaw back to the waking world. "You been talking in your sleep again, and some of the words were real scary." Skarjaw sat up on his cot, his cybernetic eye adjusting automatically to the dim light filtering through the workshop's corrugated metal walls. The vision was already beginning to fade around the edges, but its core remained crystal clear in his memory. He had seen the future of Ork artillery, and it was glorious beyond measure. "Get me some parchment and something to write with," he ordered, his voice hoarse with excitement. "And not that fancy stuff we looted from the Imperial convoy. I need proper Ork writing materials for this." The Gretchen scurried away, returning minutes later with a collection of metal plates that had been hammered flat and a stylus made from a sharpened bolt casing. Skarjaw began sketching immediately, his hands moving with a kind of focused intensity that came from channeling divine inspiration directly onto the physical plane. The first drawing showed the weapon's basic profile, a massive cannon that stretched nearly 100 meters from firing chamber to barrel tip. The second sketch detailed the power coupling system, a maze of conduits and capacitors that would have given an Imperial tech marines nightmares about proper voltage regulation. The third drawing focused on the targeting mechanism, a complex array of scopes, mirrors, and what appeared to be a mechanical fortune-telling device. As he drew, the technical details began falling into place with the inevitability of an avalanche. The weapon's ammunition would be custom forged from materials specifically chosen for their ability to maintain structural integrity while traveling at velocities that approached significant fractions of light speed. The firing sequence would require precise timing coordinated across 17 different subsystems, each one operating on principles that made perfect sense to Ork logic, while remaining completely incomprehensible to lesser species. The workshop erupted into frenzied activity within hours of Skarjaw's revelation, transforming from its usual state of controlled chaos into something that resembled a mechanical hurricane given physical form. Gretchen swarmed across the scrapyard like green ants, their high-pitched voices creating a constant chatter as they sorted components, hauled materials, and engaged in the kind of enthusiastic arguments that typically preceded either breakthrough innovations or spectacular explosions. "Right, you lot!" Skarjaw bellowed from atop the great gear gubbin, his voice carrying across the workshop with the authority of absolute conviction. "This ain't gonna be no ordinary job, so I don't want to see no ordinary effort. We're building something that's gonna make the whole galaxy take notice, which means every single one of you gets better be working like your life depends on it, 'cause it probably does." The first challenge was purely logistical, organizing the vast collection of salvaged materials into something resembling a functional construction system. Imperial supply doctrine, with its emphasis on standardized components and interchangeable parts, had been designed by minds that valued predictability over innovation. Ork engineering, by contrast, thrived on the creative tension that came from forcing incompatible technologies to work together through sheer bloody-minded determination. Gretchen teams began establishing workstations throughout the scrapyard, each one dedicated to a specific aspect of the weapon's construction. In the eastern section, A group of particularly mechanically inclined specimens started preparing the barrel components, using Imperial ceramite plating as the base layer, while reinforcing it with strips of wraithbone that had been liberated from an Eldar raiding party the previous year. The wraithbone, designed to channel psychic energy through crystalline matrices of impossible complexity, was being repurposed as structural reinforcement through the simple expedient of hitting it with hammers until it fit properly. The power coupling station had attracted Skarjaw's most trusted assistants, a collection of Gretchen who had proven their worth by successfully completing previous projects without electrocuting themselves more than once or twice. They worked with the salvaged Imperial plasma reactors, carefully disconnecting safety systems that had been designed to prevent exactly the kind of modifications they were now implementing. Each removed failsafe was greeted with chittering celebration, as though they were unwrapping presents on some peculiar greenskin holiday. "Oi, you!" Skarjaw called out to a Gretchen who was struggling with a particularly stubborn power coupling. "Dat connector ain't supposed to fit dat socket. That's why it's so much fun when it does. Just keep hammering at it until the sparks start flying in the right direction." The ammunition fabrication area had been established in what was formerly the workshop's quiet zone, though quiet was a relative term in any Ork facility. Here, teams of Gretchen worked to create the custom projectiles that would serve as the weapon's primary ammunition. Each shell was a masterpiece of controlled destruction, combining Imperial explosives with Ork engineering in ratios that would have horrified any properly trained demolitions expert. The shells themselves defied conventional understanding of ballistic physics. Rather than relying on simple kinetic energy or chemical explosives, they were designed to maintain their structural integrity while traveling at velocities that approached significant fractions of light speed. This was accomplished through a combination of advanced materials, science, and the fundamental Ork belief that anything was possible if you wanted it badly enough and weren't afraid of the occasional catastrophic failure. Still with us in the depths of this mechanical madness? Hit that like button if you're amazed by the impossible engineering taking shape before our eyes. But perhaps the most impressive sight was the targeting system assembly area, where a team of Gretchen had been tasked with creating a computational device capable of tracking targets across interplanetary distances while accounting for galactic rotation, gravitational lensing, and the inherent unpredictability of warp space fluctuations. Their solution was elegantly simple: a massive mechanical calculator constructed entirely from salvaged Imperial cogitator components, operated by a team of Gretchen who had been trained to perform astronomical calculations using nothing more than their natural counting abilities and an unshakable faith in their own mathematical prowess. The device resembled a cross between a cathedral organ and a particularly aggressive piece of industrial machinery. Hundreds of brass gears meshed with crystalline computation matrices, while banks of vacuum tubes flickered with patterns that somehow managed to represent stellar coordinates and ballistic trajectories. The entire system was powered by a hand crank operated by the workshop's largest Gretchen, who'd been chosen for the position based on his enthusiasm for repetitive tasks and his proven ability to count past 10 without using his fingers. "Beautiful, innit?" Skarjaw commented to a passing assistant, gesturing toward the targeting computer with obvious pride. "That right there is proper Ork engineering at its finest. No fancy programming, no mysterious machine spirits that might get temperamental. Just good, honest mechanical computation powered by proper greenskin enthusiasm." The construction timeline was aggressive even by Ork standards. Skarjaw had estimated that the weapon could be completed in approximately 3 weeks, assuming optimal working conditions and no more than the usual number of catastrophic setbacks. This estimate was based on his careful analysis of the technical challenges involved, the available workforce, and his absolute conviction that the universe would bend to accommodate his vision if he pushed hard enough. The moment of truth arrived on the 7th day of construction, when the first major components were ready for integration testing. Skarjaw stood before what could only be described as a monument to the triumph of enthusiasm over engineering limitations. The weapon's primary firing chamber, a cylindrical nightmare of merged technologies that hummed with barely contained energy. Imperial plasma coils wrapped around Eldar psychic resonance crystals, while Ork fabricated power couplings somehow managed to channel forces that should have vaporized them on first contact. "Right then," Skarjaw muttered, consulting his hand-drawn schematics one final time. "According to the calculations, this should either work perfectly or blow up most of the workshop. Either way, we're about to learn something important about the universe." The test setup was deceptively simple. A single power cell, one of the souped-up Imperial units from the convoy raid, would provide minimal energy to the firing chamber while diagnostic equipment monitored the weapon's basic functions. No projectiles would be fired, no targets would be destroyed, and theoretically no catastrophic explosions would occur. It was the kind of cautious, methodical testing that Imperial tech adepts would have approved of, assuming they could have overlooked the fundamental impossibility of the device being tested. Skarjaw activated the primary power coupling with the ceremonial wrench that had been blessed by 3 different Mekboys and painted with lucky symbols. The weapon's response was immediate and completely contrary to every known law of physics. Instead of drawing power from the connected cell, the firing chamber began generating its own energy, pulling electricity from sources that simply didn't exist. Sparks danced between the Eldar crystals, while the Imperial coils glowed with colors that had no names in any known language. "Well, that's interesting," he observed, with the calm detachment of a professional who had long since given up trying to understand why his creations worked. "Looks like the weapons decided it don't need no external power source after all." The energy readings climbed steadily beyond the measurement capacity of his crude instruments. What had started as a simple connectivity test was rapidly evolving into something that resembled a controlled summoning of forces from dimensions that most species preferred to pretend didn't exist. The air around the firing chamber began to shimmer with heat distortion, while metallic objects throughout the workshop started vibrating in sympathetic resonance with the weapon's internal harmonics. A team of Gretchen who had been working nearby stopped their tasks to stare at the display with the kind of rapt attention typically reserved for particularly spectacular explosions. Their simple minds couldn't comprehend the theoretical implications of what they were witnessing, but they possessed an instinctive appreciation for phenomena that defied explanation while looking extremely dangerous. "Boss," one of them ventured, his voice pitched high with excitement, "is it supposed to be making that noise?" The noise in question was a deep, thrumming vibration that seemed to emanate from the weapon's core components. It wasn't merely mechanical resonance. It was something far more fundamental, as though the device was humming in harmony with the basic frequencies of reality itself. Imperial scientists would later theorize that the weapon was somehow tapping into zero-point energy fluctuations, though their theories would fail to account for the distinctly musical quality of the emanations or the way they made nearby squigs dance with inexplicable joy. "That noise," Skarjaw replied with obvious satisfaction, "is the sound of proper Ork engineering doing exactly what it's supposed to do. That's the weapon telling the universe that it's ready to start blowing things up on a scale that ain't been seen before." The test continued for another 10 minutes, during which the weapon's energy output stabilized at levels that would have powered a small Imperial city. The firing chamber maintained perfect structural integrity despite containing forces that should have reduced it to component atoms, while the targeting systems began automatically calibrating themselves for ranges that extended well beyond the local star system. Most remarkably, the entire assembly showed no signs of the kind of catastrophic feedback loops that typically plagued experimental Ork technology. When Skarjaw finally shut down the test sequence, the sudden absence of the thrumming energy left the workshop feeling oddly empty, as though some fundamental force had been withdrawn from the local environment. The Gretchen work team stood in silence for several moments, processing the implications of what they had witnessed. "Right," Skarjaw announced, his voice carrying clearly across the sudden quiet. "I think we can safely say that the basic concept works. Now we just need to scale it up by a factor of about 100 and add all the really fun bits." The implications were staggering. If a minimal test firing had generated energy readings that exceeded their measurement capabilities, what would happen when the weapon was operating at full capacity? How would reality itself respond to the kind of forces they were preparing to unleash? These were philosophical questions that might have troubled more contemplative species, but they only served to increase Skarjaw's enthusiasm for the project. The sabotage attempt came at dawn on the 10th day, executed with all the subtlety and finesse that characterized interclan Ork politics. Skarjaw's cybernetic eye detected the intruders before they had advanced more than a few meters into the scrapyard. 3 figures moving with a distinctive swagger that marked them as rival Mekboys, accompanied by a small mob of Gretchen carrying what appeared to be improvised demolition charges. "Well, well," Skarjaw muttered, activating the workshop's defensive systems with practiced efficiency. "Looks like Skarjaw ain't the only one who's been hearing about this little project." The leader of the sabotage team was immediately recognizable as Skarjaw's longtime rival, a Mekboy called Bolt Cutter, who specialized in creating weapons that prioritized raw destructive power over such trivial concerns as accuracy, reliability, or operator safety. His reputation for innovative engineering was matched only by his talent for eliminating competitors through methods that ranged from direct challenge to creative industrial accidents. "Skarjaw, you git," Bolt Cutter called out as his team spread across the workshop's perimeter. "Heard you been building something special for the boss. Thought we'd come by and help you test it proper like." The help in question involved enough explosive charges to level several city blocks, along with a collection of improvised incendiary devices that would ensure any surviving components were thoroughly reduced to their base elements. It was the kind of assistance that typically ended with the recipient requiring extensive medical reconstruction, assuming enough remained to make reconstruction worthwhile. Skarjaw's response was swift and decisive. The workshop's defensive turrets, a collection of automated weapon systems that he had constructed from salvaged Imperial equipment and powered by his absolute conviction that trespassers deserved vigorous discouragement, swiveled toward the intruders with mechanical precision. Each turret was a masterpiece of jury-rigged engineering, combining Imperial targeting systems with Ork ammunition, feeding mechanisms, and powered by energy sources that would have mystified the original manufacturers. "That's close enough, Bolt Cutter," Skarjaw warned, his own weapons coming online with a series of ominous mechanical sounds. "Unless you want to find out what happens when my new security system gets proper field testing." The standoff that followed was a masterpiece of Ork psychological warfare. Both sides possessed enough firepower to reduce the workshop to rubble, but neither wanted to risk damaging the very weapon they were fighting over. Bolt Cutter needed Skarjaw's creation intact so he could claim credit for its design, while Skarjaw couldn't afford to let his masterpiece be destroyed by a rival's jealousy. "You always were too clever for your own good," Bolt Cutter sneered, though he made no move to advance further into the weapon's range. "But cleverness don't mean nothing if you can't finish what you started. Word is, you've been promising the boss something special, but all I see is a bunch of scrap metal and wishful thinking." The insult stung because it carried a grain of truth. The weapon was still weeks away from completion, and even Skarjaw's legendary confidence couldn't entirely dismiss the possibility that his vision had exceeded his engineering capabilities. Ork technology thrived on the edge between brilliance and catastrophe, but that edge grew narrower with each increase in scale and ambition. "Scrap metal," Skarjaw replied, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Let me show you what this scrap metal can do." He activated the weapon's targeting system, not to fire, but simply to demonstrate its operational capabilities. The massive mechanical calculator burst into life, its hundreds of gears spinning with clockwork precision while vacuum tubes flickered through calculations that tracked the orbital mechanics of every significant celestial body within a 50 light-year radius. The display was purely for show. The weapon wasn't loaded and couldn't fire in its current configuration, but the effect on the sabotage team was immediate and profound. Bolt Cutter's confident swagger evaporated as he watched the targeting system's elegant mechanical ballet. His own weapons, while undeniably destructive, relied on relatively simple principles of point at target and pull trigger until target stops moving. The complexity of Skarjaw's creation was beyond anything he had ever attempted, representing a level of engineering sophistication that would have challenged even the most experienced Imperial tech marines. That's actually working," one of Bolt Cutter's Gretchen whispered, his voice filled with the kind of awe typically reserved for religious experiences or particularly impressive explosions. "Look at all dem gears turning and dem lights flashing. It's like something the gods might build." The comment triggered a cascade of similar observations from the other members of the sabotage team. Ork appreciation for mechanical complexity was both genuine and immediate. They could recognize superior engineering when they saw it, regardless of any personal animosity toward its creator. The weapon's targeting system represented the kind of achievement that transcended clan rivalry, entering the realm of pure technological artistry. Bolt Cutter stood in silence for several long moments, his scarred features cycling through emotions that ranged from frustrated anger to grudging admiration. Finally, he turned to his team with the kind of resigned expression that marked the end of a carefully planned operation. "Right, you lot," he growled. "Pack up the charges. We're leaving." The first weapons test took place on the 15th day of construction, conducted with all the careful preparation and safety precautions that characterized Ork experimental procedures, which was to say, everyone stood well back and hoped for the best. Skarjaw had managed to complete roughly 60% of the weapon's primary systems, enough to attempt a low-power firing test using improvised ammunition and a significantly reduced energy output. The test projectile was a work of art in its own right. a standard Imperial artillery shell that had been improved through the addition of Ork guidance systems, enhanced explosive charges, and what Skarjaw optimistically described as extra Daka bits. The shell gleamed with fresh paint, red for speed, yellow for bigger explosions, and green because green was obviously the best color, while its modified fusing system incorporated components from at least 6 different weapon systems that had never been intended to work together. "Remember, this is just a little test," Skarjaw announced to the assembled crowd of Gretchen, boys, and curious onlookers who had gathered to witness the historic moment. "We ain't trying to blow up the whole planet or nothing, just a nice, controlled demonstration of the basic principles involved." The target was a derelict Imperial Chimera transport that had been positioned approximately 1 kilometer away, far enough to provide a reasonable test of the weapon's accuracy while close enough to ensure that even a complete miss would still be entertaining. The vehicle had been painted with bright colors to make it easier to spot, though given the expected magnitude of the explosion, visibility was unlikely to be an issue. Skarjaw took his position at the weapon's primary control station, a jury-rigged command center that combined elements from Imperial tank fire control systems, Ork mechanical engineering, and what appeared to be a decorative ship's wheel that he had added because it looked appropriately authoritative. The targeting computer hummed to life around him, its mechanical components spinning through calculations with the kind of precise choreography that suggested the device was genuinely enjoying its work. "Target acquired," announced the lead Gretchen spotter, who was perched atop the targeting system's primary optical array with a telescope that had been borrowed from an Imperial observation post. "Range 1,000 meters, bearing that way, windage, a bit to the left maybe." The firing sequence began with the activation of the weapon's power systems. Energy flowed through the modified Imperial plasma coils, while the Eldar psychic crystals began resonating at frequencies that made nearby metal objects hum in sympathy. The air around the firing chamber shimmered with heat distortion as forces that had no names in Imperial technical manuals built toward their critical threshold. "Initiating primary charge sequence," Skarjaw reported, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "All systems showing green. Well, mostly green. Some of them are flashing red, but that's probably normal." The weapon's response exceeded every prediction. Instead of the controlled, measured discharge that Skarjaw had planned, the firing chamber unleashed a torrent of energy that transformed the test projectile into something that resembled a miniature star. The shells streaked across the intervening distance in a blaze of light that left after images burned into the retinas of anyone foolish enough to look directly at it. The impact with the target Chimera was spectacular beyond description. The derelict vehicle didn't simply explode. It underwent what Imperial physicists would later classify as spontaneous matter-to-energy conversion on a macroscopic scale. The blast crater extended nearly 100 meters in diameter, while the shockwave shattered windows in the Orks settlement 3 kilometers away. But the weapon's performance was only half the story. The recoil from the discharge had been significantly more powerful than Skarjaw's calculations had predicted, sending the entire firing platform sliding backward across the rocky ground while leaving a furrow that would remain visible for decades. The barrel itself had survived the experience, but several of the support structures showed stress fractures that would require immediate attention. "Well," Skarjaw observed with characteristic understatement, "that was definitely more exciting than I expected." The assembled spectators erupted into cheers and applause, their enthusiasm undiminished by the fact that the test had come perilously close to destroying the weapon itself. In Ork culture, any experiment that produced spectacular results while leaving the experimenters mostly intact was considered an unqualified success. "Boss is gonna love this," one of the Gretchen declared, dancing around the smoking firing platform with obvious glee. "Wait till he sees what this thing can do when it's really finished." The test had demonstrated both the weapon's tremendous potential and the challenges that remained before it could be considered operational. The power systems needed recalibration to prevent the kind of energy surges that could damage the firing mechanism, while the targeting computer required fine-tuning to account for the projectile's unexpected velocity characteristics. The energy in the camp was palpable now, crackling through the air like electricity before a thunderstorm. Word of the successful weapons test had spread through the clan with the speed that only truly exciting news could achieve among greenskins. Boys who had been engaged in routine maintenance work suddenly found themselves humming with anticipation, while Gretchens scurried about their tasks with an enthusiasm that bordered on religious fervor. The very atmosphere seemed charged with potential, as though the universe itself was holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Skarjaw could feel it in his bones, that familiar tingle that preceded the most spectacular achievements of Ork engineering. It was the sensation of collective belief reaching critical mass, of thousands of greenskin minds focused on a single shared vision of glorious destruction. The war. Energy was building like pressure in a steam boiler, and his weapon was positioned to serve as its primary outlet. "You feel that, don't you?" he asked a passing Gretchen who had stopped to admire the weapon's newly reinforced firing platform. The diminutive creature nodded vigorously, his eyes wide with the kind of excitement that came from being part of something genuinely historic. "It's like the air's all tingly and full of sparks," the Gretchen replied, his voice pitched high with enthusiasm. "Makes me want to build things and blow things up at the same time." That was exactly the phenomenon that Imperial xenobiologists had struggled to quantify for decades. The Wa field wasn't simply a psychic manifestation. It was a fundamental alteration in the fabric of local reality, bending the laws of physics to accommodate Ork expectations and desires. When enough greenskins believed in something strongly enough, the universe itself began to reshape itself to match their collective vision. The weapon was now drawing power not just from its mechanical components, but from the raw enthusiasm of every Ork in the settlement. Each expression of excitement, each boast about the destruction to come, each moment of shared anticipation added another increment of energy to the device's growing potential. The firing chamber hummed with harmonics that extended well beyond the audible spectrum, while the targeting system's mechanical components moved with a precision that exceeded their original design specifications. Gretchen work teams had begun reporting unusual phenomena throughout the workshop. Tools that had been dulled by years of use were suddenly cutting with razor sharpness, while improvised components fit together with tolerances that would have impressed Imperial tech marines. Materials that should have been incompatible were forming bonds that exceeded the strength of either component individually. "The whole workshop's getting more orky by the hour," observed one of Skarjaw's senior assistants, a grizzled Gretchen who had survived more experimental weapon tests than most Orks, twice his size. "Even the scrap metal's starting to look more eager to be part of something big." The phenomenon extended beyond mere mechanical improvements. The weapons ammunition fabrication system had begun producing shells that defied conventional understanding of ballistic physics. Each projectile emerged from the production line with characteristics that should have been impossible. They were simultaneously heavier and lighter than their component materials, while their explosive charges contained more energy than the chemicals used to create them. Skarjaw had attempted to measure the energy readings using captured Imperial detection equipment, but the instruments had proven inadequate to the task. The power levels being generated exceeded the measurement capabilities of devices designed to monitor plasma reactor output and void shield fluctuations. Whatever forces his weapon was channeling operated on scales that pushed the boundaries of Imperial scientific understanding. The excitement wasn't limited to the immediate vicinity of the workshop. Reports had begun arriving from patrol units operating at the edges of clan territory, describing unusual atmospheric disturbances and energy readings that seemed to emanate from the direction of Skarjaw's facility. Imperial reconnaissance satellites had begun adjusting their orbital patterns to maintain observation distance from the growing anomaly, while astropathic communications from the sector capital carried increasingly urgent requests for information about unusual psychic emanations detected by sanctioned psychers. Boss Grimskull's been getting reports from the outer patrols, another Gretchen informed Skarjaw as he conducted his daily inspection of the weapon's primary systems. They're saying the whole sky looks different when you look toward the workshop. All sparkly and green, like the air's got little lightning bolts in it. The visual manifestations were merely the most obvious signs of the deeper changes taking place. The weapon had become a focal point for forces that operated according to principles that Imperial science couldn't adequately explain or predict. It wasn't simply drawing power from conventional sources. It was tapping into the fundamental energies that bound the galaxy together, channeling them through systems that had been designed with intuitive understanding rather than theoretical knowledge. The targeting computer had begun displaying astronomical data with accuracy that exceeded anything in Imperial databases. Star charts that had required decades of careful observation were being calculated in real time, while orbital mechanics were being tracked with precision that would have impressed the Adeptus Mechanicus. The device was somehow accessing information that existed beyond the scope of its physical sensors, drawing on data sources that transcended conventional understanding of space and time. The Imperial reconnaissance team arrived on the 18th day, their presence detected by Orks sentries long before their Chimera transports crested the distant ridgeline. The expedition consisted of 3 tech priests, a squad of Skitarii rangers, and enough sophisticated scanning equipment to outfit a small research station. Their mission, according to intercepted Vox communications, was to investigate the anomalous energy readings that had been disrupting Imperial sensor networks across a 50 light-year radius. "Well, this should be interesting," Skarjaw observed, watching the Imperial vehicles through a salvaged periscope as they established their observation post approximately 5 kilometers from the workshop's perimeter. "Been wondering when those red-robed gits would show up to see what all the fuss was about." The tech priests had positioned their equipment with a methodical precision that characterized all Adeptus Mechanicus operations. Auspex arrays swept across the Ork settlement in carefully coordinated patterns, while cogitator banks processed the incoming data streams with mechanical efficiency. Their investigation was being conducted according to protocols that had been refined over millennia of xenotech analysis, following procedures designed to minimize risk while maximizing information gathering. What they discovered defied every principle of Imperial scientific understanding. "Impossible," muttered Tech Priest Dominus Vex Alpha 7, his mechanical voice carrying clearly across the observation post despite the electronic distortion filters built into his vocalizer unit. The energy readings exceed theoretical maximums by several orders of magnitude. Either our instruments are malfunctioning, or these greenskins have somehow accessed power sources that exist outside conventional physical laws. The scanning equipment painted a picture that challenged everything the Imperials thought they knew about Ork technology. The workshop's energy signature resembled nothing in their extensive databases. It wasn't fusion power, plasma generation, or any other conventional energy source. Instead, the reading suggested something that could only be described as localized reality distortion on a massive scale, as though the fundamental constants of physics had been adjusted within a specific geographical area. The gravitational anomalies alone should have caused catastrophic structural failures, observed Tech Priest Gamanexus 4, consulting readouts that flickered with data streams beyond normal human comprehension. The electromagnetic flux variations exceed anything we've recorded outside of active warp storms. Yet the greenskin settlement shows no signs of the kind of devastation such forces should have produced. The most disturbing readings came from the psychic detection arrays. The Ork workshop was generating what could only be described as a psychic pressure wave that extended far beyond the visible boundaries of the settlement. The phenomenon defied classification according to established Imperial doctrine. It wasn't chaos corruption, Xenos psionics, or any other recognized threat category. It was something entirely new, something that suggested the greenskins had stumbled upon principles that even the most learned members of the Adeptus Mechanicus couldn't adequately explain. Back in the workshop, Skarjaw was well aware of the Imperial surveillance operation. His own detection equipment, a hodgepodge of salvaged sensors and Gretchen observers equipped with telescopes, had been tracking the tech priests since their arrival. The irony wasn't lost on him that his crude, improvised monitoring system was providing more accurate intelligence than the Imperial's sophisticated scanning arrays. "They're getting real excited about something," he reported to a gathering of senior Gretchen who had assembled for their daily progress briefing. "All that fancy equipment's blinking and buzzing like it's about to have some kind of mechanical fit. Probably means we're doing something right." The weapon itself seemed to respond to the Imperial attention with what could only be described as mechanical pride. The firing chamber's energy output had increased by nearly 15% since the tech priests had begun their scans, while the targeting system had started automatically tracking the Imperial observation post with the kind of precision that suggested it was considering the visitors as potential test subjects. Comment your theories below. What corrupted energies are the tech priests detecting, and how will they respond to this impossible Ork creation? The psychological effect on the Imperial team was becoming increasingly evident as their investigation continued. Tech priests were trained to approach the unknown with analytical detachment, relying on empirical data and logical reasoning to understand phenomena that fell outside conventional experience. But the Ork weapon challenged those methodologies at a fundamental level, presenting them with evidence that suggested their basic understanding of reality might be incomplete. The power coupling systems appear to violate basic conservation principles, reported Tech Priest Theta Binary 9, his voice carrying the kind of mechanical distress that indicated severe cognitive strain. Energy output exceeds input by factors that should be physically impossible. Either we're witnessing technology that surpasses anything in Imperial archives, or these measurements indicate corruption by forces beyond our current understanding. The implications were staggering. If the Orks had somehow developed weapons technology that exceeded Imperial capabilities, it would represent a strategic threat of unprecedented magnitude. But if the readings indicated chaos corruption or Xenos influence, the response would need to be immediate and overwhelming. The tech priests found themselves facing a decision that could determine the fate of the entire sector. The weapon continued its construction schedule with mechanical indifference to the Imperial surveillance. Gretchen work teams maintained their frenzied pace while the device's various systems integrated themselves with a kind of seamless coordination that suggested they had been designed by minds far more sophisticated than their actual creators. The targeting computer had begun generating firing solutions for targets throughout the local star system, while the ammunition fabrication systems produced shells that defied conventional understanding of explosive chemistry. The final assembly began at dawn on the 21st day, marked by a ceremony that combined Ork engineering tradition with a kind of mechanical pageantry that would have impressed even the most jaded Imperial observer. Skarjaw stood before the assembled components of his masterpiece, each piece representing weeks of inspired construction and countless hours of Gretchen labor. The weapon's barrel sections lay arranged in precise order, their surfaces gleaming with fresh paint and psychic resonance crystals that pulsed with inner light. "Right den, you magnificent gits," Skarjaw proclaimed to the gathered workforce, his voice carrying across the workshop with the authority of absolute conviction. "Today's day. We put all the pieces together and showed the galaxy what proper Ork engineering can accomplish. Every single one of you lot has earned your place in history, and I want you to remember that when you're telling your grandgrots about the time you helped build the most impossibly destructive weapon the universe has ever seen." The assembly process required coordination on a scale that challenged even Ork organizational capabilities. Teams of Gretchen had been assigned to specific tasks based on their demonstrated competence with particular types of components, while larger work groups handled the heavy lifting required to position the weapon's massive structural elements. The entire operation was orchestrated through a combination of shouted commands, hand signals, and the kind of intuitive understanding that came from working with the same crew for weeks on end. The barrel assembly alone was a masterwork of impossible engineering. Each section had been crafted to tolerances that exceeded anything achievable through conventional manufacturing, yet they fit together with the precision of components produced by the finest Imperial fabrication facilities. The joints between sections were sealed with a combination of molecular bonding agents and what Skarjaw described as proper Orky determination, creating connections that were stronger than the materials they joined. "Careful with that crystal array," Skarjaw called out to a team of Gretchen who were maneuvering one of the weapon's psychic focusing elements into position. "Those crystals took us 3 weeks to calibrate proper-like, and I don't want to have to explain to the boss why we're starting over from scratch." The Eldar wraithbone components presented particular challenges, their crystalline structure requiring alignment with astronomical phenomena that existed well beyond the local star system. The installation process involved calculations that pushed the limits of the mechanical targeting computer, while the actual positioning required the kind of precision that could only be achieved through the direct intervention of Ork intuition guided by absolute faith in the final result. As each major component was installed, the weapon's overall energy signature increased exponentially. The Imperial observation post's scanning equipment was now registering readings that exceeded the measurement capabilities of their most sophisticated instruments, while psychic detection arrays painted pictures of reality distortion that challenged everything the tech priests thought they understood about physics and engineering. "The power couplings reaching critical resonance," announced the lead Gretchen technician, his voice high with excitement as he monitored the weapon's primary energy systems. "All the crystals are singing in harmony, and the plasma coils are glowing like little green suns." The targeting system integration was perhaps the most spectacular aspect of the assembly process. As the final mechanical components were connected, the massive calculation engine burst into life with a display of coordinated motion that resembled the clockwork of the gods themselves. Hundreds of gears spun in perfect synchronization, while vacuum tubes flickered through computational sequences that tracked the orbital mechanics of every significant celestial body within a 100 light-year radius. The ammunition loading system had been designed with a kind of elegant simplicity that characterized the finest Ork engineering. Custom-forged shells were fed into the weapon's primary chamber through a mechanical conveyor system that operated with clockwork precision, while the firing sequence could be initiated through a single control lever that had been painted red and decorated with appropriate warning symbols. "Look at that beautiful piece of kit," Skarjaw declared, stepping back to admire his completed creation. The weapon stretched nearly 100 meters from firing chamber to barrel tip, its surface covered in the kind of intricate mechanical details that spoke to weeks of careful craftsmanship. Energy conduits pulsed with green light, while psychic resonance crystals hummed in harmony with frequencies that existed well beyond normal human hearing. The device represented the culmination of everything Skarjaw had learned about the marriage of Imperial technology, Xenos components, and pure Ork ingenuity. It was simultaneously impossible and inevitable, a testament to the power of absolute conviction combined with unlimited enthusiasm for destruction on a cosmic scale. "Right," he announced to the assembled crowd. "Time for the final systems check. I want every Gretchen at his post, every power coupling verified, and every targeting calculation double-checked. When we fire this beauty for the first time, I want it to be perfect. The kind of perfect that makes the whole galaxy sit up and take notice." The weapon was complete, but its true test lay ahead. Soon, Warboss Grimskull would witness the fruits of weeks of inspired engineering, and the galaxy would learn what happened when Ork technology was pushed beyond the boundaries of possibility into the realm of the truly miraculous. The moment of ultimate truth arrived with all the ceremonial gravity that befitted the culmination of weeks of inspired madness. Warboss Grimskull had assembled not just his immediate retinue, but representatives from neighboring clans, rival Mekboys who had come to witness either triumph or spectacular failure, and enough boys to form a proper audience for what promised to be the most memorable weapons demonstration in recent Ork history. Skarjaw stood at the weapon's primary control station, his hands resting on the firing controls with the reverent care of a priest handling sacred relics. The target had been selected with appropriate ambition. An abandoned Imperial mining facility approximately 50 kilometers distant, its structures massive enough to provide a proper test of the weapon's destructive capabilities while positioned far enough away to ensure that even a catastrophic misfire wouldn't endanger the spectators. "Ladies and gentlemen, well, mostly gentlemen, actually, just Orks," Skarjaw announced through the workshop's improvised public address system, "you are about to witness the first official test firing of the Gork-Touched Megablasta. the most impossibly destructive weapon ever created by greenskin hands. The weapon itself seemed to sense the significance of the moment. Energy readings climbed steadily as the device drew power from sources that extended well beyond its mechanical components. The wah field generated by hundreds of excited orcs fed directly into the firing chamber's psychic resonance crystals, while the targeting system's mechanical components moved with a kind of precise choreography that suggested they were genuinely enjoying their moment of glory. "Primary systems online," called out the lead Gretchen technician, his voice carrying clearly across the sudden hush that had fallen over the assembled crowd. "Power coupling at maximum efficiency. Targeting computer locked onto primary objective." The Imperial observation post, still maintaining their surveillance from the distant ridgeline, suddenly erupted into frenzied activity as their scanning equipment registered energy buildups that exceeded anything they had previously recorded. Tech Priest Dominus Vex Alpha 7's mechanical voice crackled across their communication channels with the kind of urgency typically reserved for planetary-scale emergencies. "All stations, prepare for immediate withdrawal," he commanded, his synthesized words carrying clearly across the observation post. Energy readings indicate an imminent discharge that could pose a threat to personnel at any range within direct line of sight. But retreat was no longer an option. The weapon's energy buildup had reached critical threshold, creating a localized reality distortion field that made conventional space-time navigation increasingly unreliable. The Imperial vehicles found their engines responding sluggishly to control inputs, while their sophisticated navigation equipment provided readings that contradicted everything they thought they knew about their current position. "Initiating final firing sequence," Skarjaw announced, his voice steady despite the magnitude of forces building around him. The weapon's barrel began to glow with inner light as energy flowed through systems that had been designed to channel powers beyond conventional understanding. The air itself seemed to thicken with potential, while metallic objects throughout the workshop began vibrating in sympathy with harmonic frequencies that existed well beyond normal perception. The ammunition feeding system delivered the first test shell with mechanical precision, sliding the custom-forged projectile into the weapon's primary chamber, where it was immediately enveloped by energies that transformed its basic molecular structure. What had started as a relatively simple explosive device became something that could only be described as weaponized possibility, a projectile that carried within itself the absolute certainty of its target's destruction. "All systems green," reported the targeting technician, his voice high with excitement. "Target acquired and locked. Atmospheric conditions optimal, gravitational lensing accounted for, ready to fire on your command." Grimskull stepped forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the control station as he surveyed the assembled weapon with obvious satisfaction. His scarred features carried the expression of a connoisseur who had finally found something worthy of his attention, while his mechanical eye tracked across the device's various systems with the appreciation of someone who understood the magnitude of what he was witnessing. "Skarjaw, you're magnificent git," the Warboss growled, his voice carrying the kind of genuine respect that was rarely heard in Ork leadership hierarchies. "This is exactly the kind of proper destructive capability I was hoping for. Fire when ready." The final command echoed across the workshop like thunder, immediately followed by the kind of silence that precedes truly historic moments. Every eye focused on the weapon's massive barrel as energy levels reached their critical threshold. The targeting computer's mechanical components spun through their final calculations, while psychic resonance crystals sang in harmony with frequencies that made the local reality itself tremble with anticipation. Skarjaw's hand closed on the firing lever with ceremonial deliberation. "For the glory of the clan," he declared, "and the advancement of proper Ork engineering everywhere." The weapon fired. The universe paused, took a moment to consider the implications of what was being asked of it, and then reluctantly complied with a discharge that redefined the local understanding of cause and effect. The projectile didn't simply leave the barrel, it transcended conventional notions of ballistic physics, becoming something that existed simultaneously at the firing point, along its trajectory, and at its destination. Space-time folded around the shell's passage like reality was making room for something it hadn't previously been equipped to handle. The sound came first, not the crack of conventional artillery, but a deep, resonant note that seemed to emerge from the fundamental frequencies of creation itself. It was the sound of mathematics being forced to accommodate impossible equations, of physics textbooks throughout the galaxy spontaneously updating themselves to include new chapters on applied Orky engineering. The noise rolled across the landscape like thunder, but thunder that carried within it the harmonics of stellar formation and the death songs of dying stars. The visual display was beyond description. The weapon's discharge created a column of green fire that stretched from the barrel to the horizon, a beam of energy so intense that it left after-images burned into the optical equipment of anyone foolish enough to observe it directly. The projectile's passage through the atmosphere created phenomena that would baffle Imperial meteorologists for decades. Clouds that formed geometric patterns, atmospheric pressure waves that played musical scales, and a temporary aurora that spelled out crude Orky victory slogans across the sky. Wag. The victory cry erupted from hundreds of throats as the assembled Orks witnessed their Mekboy's greatest achievement. The sound carried across the settlement with the force of a sonic weapon, while the excitement generated by the successful test firing fed back into the weapon's psychic resonance systems, amplifying its power output even as the primary discharge concluded. At the Imperial observation post, sophisticated recording equipment captured data that would perplex xenotech analysts for generations. The energy readings exceeded theoretical maximums by factors that challenged basic mathematical principles, while the gravitational anomalies created by the weapon's discharge temporarily altered the orbital mechanics of the planet's 3 moons. Tech Priest Dominus Vex Alpha 7's mechanical voice carried the kind of electronic distress that indicated severe cognitive strain as he attempted to process readings that contradicted everything he'd been taught about the nature of reality. "Impossible," he muttered through his vocalizer systems. "The energy output exceeds the theoretical capacity of a small star. Either our instruments have suffered catastrophic calibration failure, or we have just witnessed technology that surpasses anything in Imperial archives by several thousand years of theoretical advancement." But the true measure of the weapon's success lay 50 kilometers away, where the abandoned Imperial mining facility had been transformed into something that could only be described as an artistic interpretation of total annihilation. The complex hadn't simply been destroyed. It had been removed from reality with such thoroughness that the crater left behind seemed to extend into dimensions that conventional geology couldn't adequately map. The blast zone was perfectly circular, its edges defined with mathematical precision, while the center contained materials that hadn't existed moments before the impact. Warboss Grimskull stood before the weapon in silence for several long moments, his scarred features cycling through expressions that ranged from awe to something approaching religious reverence. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the kind of authority that could launch 1,000 ships and reduce entire star systems to rubble. "Boys," he announced, his words carrying clearly across the cheering crowd, "I think it's time for a proper why." The declaration triggered a cascade of responses that would reshape the balance of power throughout the sector. Clan war horns began sounding across the settlement, their deep voices calling orcs to battle with the kind of enthusiasm that hadn't been heard since the last Great Crusade. Vehicle engines roared to life as trucks, battle wagons, and war tracks prepared for immediate deployment, while weapon workshops throughout the territory erupted into frenzied activity as mech boys scrambled to prepare their deadliest creations for the coming campaign. The weapon itself seemed to respond to the declaration with mechanical satisfaction. Its energy reading stabilized at levels that would provide sustained firing capability throughout the extended campaign, while the targeting system began automatically calculating firing solutions for Imperial installations throughout the local star cluster. The ammunition fabrication system increased its output to wartime production levels, creating shells that carried within them the collective excitement of an entire greenskin civilization preparing for its favorite activity. "Right then, Skarjaw," Grimskull declared, turning to face his mech boy with the kind of grin that had terrified Imperial commanders across a dozen sectors. "I hope you've got plenty more of dose shells ready, 'cause we're about to give the whole galaxy a proper demonstration of what happens when you let orcs get creative with heavy artillery." The war had begun, and at its heart stood a weapon that represented the ultimate marriage of orc ingenuity, Imperial technology, and pure destructive enthusiasm. The galaxy would never be the same. The Great War that followed would be remembered in Imperial records as the Kalos Sector Incident, though such dry terminology failed to capture the sheer scale of mechanical artistry and organized destruction that Grimskull's forces unleashed across 17 star system. The Gork-Touched Megablasta became the centerpiece of a campaign that redefined warfare on a galactic scale, its impossible capabilities enabling tactical maneuvers that would have been unthinkable with conventional artillery. Within the first week of the offensive, Imperial fortress worlds that had withstood siege for centuries found themselves reduced to component atoms by shells that traveled through space-time itself. The weapon's ammunition had evolved beyond simple explosive projectiles into what could only be described as weaponized physics. Each shell carried within it the absolute certainty of its target's non-existence, delivered with a kind of precision that made conventional defensive strategies obsolete. Skarjaw had established himself as the undisputed master of the weapon's operation, his understanding of its impossible systems growing more intuitive with each firing. The device responded to his commands with the eagerness of a favored pet, its targeting computer automatically adjusting for variables that existed well beyond conventional ballistic calculations. Range became meaningless when projectiles could fold space to reach their destinations, while traditional concepts of ammunition supply were rendered obsolete by fabrication systems that drew materials from sources that existed outside normal physical laws. "That's the beauty of proper orc engineering," he explained to a delegation of visiting Mekboy, who had come to study his creation's design principles. "You don't try to understand how it works. You just make sure it knows what you want it to do, and then you get out of the way while it does it better than you ever imagined possible." The weapon's reputation had spread throughout the Ork territories with a speed that only truly spectacular achievements could manage. Clans that had been feuding for generations put aside their differences to join Grimskull's war, drawn by reports of artillery that could punch holes through reality itself. The settlement's population had swollen to nearly 1 million greenskins, all of them eager to witness the impossible weapon in action or contribute to its continued operation. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the weapon's performance was its effect on Ork technology throughout the sector. The success of the Gork-Touched Megablasta had created what Imperial xenobiologists would later classify as a technological inspiration cascade. Other mechboys, inspired by Skarjaw's achievement, began pushing their own creations beyond previous limitations. Vehicle engines that had been considered adequate suddenly began generating power outputs that exceeded their design specifications by orders of magnitude. Weapons that had been reliable became devastatingly accurate. Even simple tools began performing with a kind of precision that suggested they had been touched by the same forces that made the Great Cannon possible. The Imperial response had been swift but largely ineffective. Fleet elements dispatched to contain the Ork advance found themselves facing artillery that could engage targets at ranges exceeding their sensor capabilities, while planetary defense systems designed to withstand conventional bombardment proved inadequate against projectiles that existed partially outside normal space-time. The weapon's psychological impact was perhaps even more significant than its tactical capabilities. Imperial commanders found themselves reluctant to commit forces against an enemy that possessed weapons beyond their understanding. Tech Priest Dominus Vex Alpha 7's final report to the Adeptus Mechanicus would become required reading in xenotech analysis courses for generations to come. His documentation of the weapon's capabilities included theoretical frameworks that pushed the boundaries of Imperial scientific understanding, while his recommendations for countermeasures acknowledged that conventional tactical doctrine was inadequate to address the threat posed by truly advanced Ork engineering. The greenskins have achieved something that our most learned scholars would have deemed impossible, his report concluded. They have created technology that operates according to principles we do not fully understand, powered by forces that exist outside our current theoretical models. The implications for Imperial strategic planning are profound and disturbing. The weapon continued its devastating work throughout the campaign, its performance improving with each engagement as the growing Wa energy fed back into its psychic resonance systems. What had begun as an experimental artillery piece had evolved into something that resembled a force of nature, a manifestation of pure Ork will given mechanical form and cosmic scope. Standing before his creation as the latest barrage concluded, Skarjaw felt a satisfaction that transcended mere professional pride. He had achieved something that would be remembered long after his individual identity had faded into clan legend. He had proven that the only limitations on Ork engineering were the boundaries of imagination itself. The galaxy would never underestimate greenskin ingenuity again. In the grim darkness of the 40th millennium, where the impossible has become mundane and miracles are measured in megatonnage, the tale of Skarjaw's Gork-Touched Megablasta stands as testament to a fundamental truth that the Imperium has spent 10,000 years trying to suppress. Sometimes, pure enthusiasm trumps 10 millennia of accumulated knowledge. The weapon itself would go on to serve Grimskull's Wa for another 3 years, each engagement adding new legends to its already impossible reputation. Imperial tactical manuals were rewritten to include contingencies for artillery that could engage targets in adjacent star systems, while tech priests throughout the galaxy began grudgingly acknowledging that their understanding of physics might require some rather uncomfortable revisions. But the Gork-Touched Megablasta's true legacy wasn't measured in destroyed fortress worlds or shattered Imperial fleets. It lay in the inspiration it provided to every Mekboy who witnessed its construction, every Gretchen who helped assemble its impossible components, and every Ork who saw its green fire reach across the void to touch distant worlds with the gentle caress of total annihilation. The weapon had proven something that Imperial doctrine refused to acknowledge: that technology wasn't bound by the rigid constraints of theoretical possibility, but by the limitations of imagination and the strength of conviction. When enough beings believed that something should work, the universe itself would eventually accommodate that belief, bending physics, rewriting mathematics, and adjusting the fundamental constants of reality to avoid the embarrassment of contradicting such absolute faith. Skarjaw's creation represented the purest expression of Ork engineering philosophy, the marriage of salvaged materials, inspired improvisation, and the unshakable conviction that any problem could be solved by applying sufficient quantities of enthusiasm and high explosives. It was a testament to the power of thinking outside conventional boundaries, of refusing to accept that anything was truly impossible when approached with sufficient determination and a healthy disregard for safety protocols. The Imperial forces that eventually contained Grimskull's did so not through superior technology or tactical brilliance, but through the simple expedient of waiting for the Orks to become bored with their current targets and wander off in search of new challenges. The weapon was abandoned in place, its ammunition exhausted and its operators distracted by reports of even more exciting conflicts in distant sectors. Imperial recovery teams would find the device 3 months later, its systems still humming with residual energy despite the complete absence of any identifiable power source. Tech priests spent decades attempting to understand its construction principles, their efforts producing nothing but increasingly frustrated technical reports and a disturbing tendency for nearby equipment to begin operating beyond its design specifications. The weapon was eventually declared too dangerous for analysis and sealed within a specialized containment facility where it remains to this day, a monument to the triumph of impossible engineering over sensible limitations. Occasionally, junior tech adepts report hearing mechanical sounds emanating from the containment chamber, as though the device is patiently waiting for someone with sufficient imagination to activate it once again. In Ork settlements throughout the galaxy, the story of Skarjaw's great weapon has become legend, a tale told around campfires and in workshop corners, inspiring new generations of Mekboys to push beyond conventional boundaries in pursuit of ever greater impossibilities. Each telling adds new details to the story, new specifications to the weapon's performance, new proof that the only real limits are those imposed by insufficient enthusiasm. The Emperor may protect, but Gork and Mork favor those who refuse to accept that anything is truly impossible when approached with proper Orky ingenuity and an appropriately explosive attitude toward problem solving. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, new impossibilities are already taking shape in workshops and scrapyards across the galaxy. The next great weapon is being born, assembled by hands that have never heard the word impossible and wouldn't believe it if they had. After all, if it doesn't work the first time, you just need bigger hammers and more enthusiasm. The Emperor protects. More stories await.